Call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight, and thank you for observing our social distancing chair setup. Just for the record, today is Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. We're in the City Hall auditorium. All of the Board of Finance members are present in the auditorium with us this evening. It is now 5:01, and before we open the meeting and start going through the agenda, could we please stand and pledge the flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'm going to jump right into the agenda because I think our discussions are going to be a little protracted. So item number 1 on the agenda is I will entertain a motion to open the meeting to the public.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, and seconded by Mr. Bayes. Are all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are open to the public. Members of the public, anybody wishing to address the Board of Finance at this time? Seeing none, we'll move right into item 2. I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the regular meeting held on May 18th, 2021.
So moved. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And seconded by Mr. Bayes. All in questions on the minutes or the motion?
I think I have an abstention there, Mayor. I don't think I was
You were not?
present for that meeting, so
Okay, good.
one abstention.
Also.
All right. So when I call the vote, I'll ask for the abstentions. If there are no questions, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And abstentions
Aye.
I abstain.
would be, thank you, Mr. Bushka and Mr. Bayes. Item 3, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the special meeting held jointly with the City Council on June 3rd, 2021. So moved. Thank you, Ms. Pesky.
Second.
And Mr. Boynton. Questions on the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
One abstention with Mr. Bushka. Item 4, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the public hearing held jointly with the City Council on June 3rd, 2021.
So moved, right?
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Anderson. Questions on the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Abstain.
Oh, I'm sorry, one abstention for Mr. Bushka. All right, so item 5 is a discussion on the budgets, and this is just discussion. So at this point, if we could pull up the PowerPoint presentation, which I think this is my 3rd generation, and I go, can you all see the presentation? No? Do you want to sit on that side of the room?
I printed the old one.
Is this the,
I know, I'm
there's
sorry.
another newer one today?
Yeah, there's one at 3 o'clock, 3:30.
Yep,
Did you get
This,
yes, you could throw that one away.
throw this
The
away.
one that I sent to you yesterday,
Yeah.
throw it away.
I reprinted the new stuff.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to go slowly so that as questions come up, they can be posed. This is a discussion, and I'm sure that the board members will have questions as they walk through this. So moving into page 2, what I wanted to do is, obviously, last year was an exceptional year. We were trying to adapt a budget in the throes of the pandemic. Many of our buildings were shut down. We were working with staffing levels, that we were separating and doing half the week in office, half the week working from home. And even the Board of Finance had to participate via Zoom. So I thought that it would be helpful for us to at least start with that baseline of what happened last year. And that's what you see on this page. You will remember that we had no way of knowing what this pandemic was going to demand of the city or the Board of Education, with the need for enhanced cleaning, increased HVA systems, teaching remotely, computer needs for the Board of Education, working a combination or hybrid of working remotely and in office here at City Hall. So we really were looking for a budget that increased both the city and the Board of Education at the time. I think it was the wisest thing that we could have done under the circumstances. But what we also recognize is we didn't have the revenues that would support the two increases that were being approved. So we dug in to those non-recurring revenue sources. We took $2.5 million from fund balance. The Board of Education's operating surpluses were used to offset the increases. Our internal service fund, we used $2 million, and we set aside from out of the fund balance our COVID expense revenue of $400,000. So we really balanced last year's budget using those non-recurring one-time revenue sources of $5.6 million.
And have we actually used all that fund balance money?
No.
At this point in time, I'm anticipating we are going to use about 2 million, maybe a little bit more.
Thank you.
2 million of the 2.5 or 2 million of the 5.6?
2 million of the 3.6. The 2 million that came in for the internal service fund was automatically part of the calculation.
Okay.
So that, you'll see later on, we talk about $1.6 million being used out of fund balance to apply to this year's budget. So you heard Alice say 3.6. She anticipates only needing 2 million of what we set aside out of fund balance, leaving that 1.6. Other questions on what we did last year? All right. So moving into the next page. Throughout this whole budget process, I don't know with the Board of Education what your discussions were, but here on the city side, every meeting that we had, budget subcommittee, joint meetings, Board of Safety meetings, we kept saying, if we cut this out of the budget, we had hoped that this would qualify for funding under the ARPA funds. It was a mantra that I was believing and hoping would in fact be the case. Guidance documents came out on May 10th. They were updated on May 27th. They were updated on June 8th. And with every update, we are less encouraged that these funds are an open checkbook. What we've learned is that these funds are tied to specific funding objectives as itemized in the guidance or this quick reference. You'll see they are specifically tied to supports for urgent COVID-19 response, a replacement of public sector revenues, support for immediate economic stabilization, and they must be used to address systemic public health and economic challenges that have been exacerbated by COVID-19. So you can see they're still very much tied to a response to COVID-19. The only outlier in these 4 priorities or funding objectives is the restoration of lost revenue to a municipality or public sector lost revenue. Alice, dove right in. There's a complicated formula for calculating what that revenue is that involves, your last full fiscal year, an 18-month period between that last full fiscal year and December 31st of 2021, 2021. And based on our early calculations, we are not showing a significant loss of revenue. In fact, we're not even sure that we lost any revenue. So Alice and I will be meeting with our Connecticut Conference of Municipalities advocacy group that has been established to sit down with them to go over all of our calculations based on the worksheet that was provided by National League of Cities, just to see if we're doing this correctly, because the lost revenue is the only pot of money, so to speak, or pool of money that gives us some broad latitude as to how to spend it. So that's the first thing we have to do, but for budget purposes, we're just saying at this point that is not something that's being used in our calculations.
So our private tax collector in this case worked against us.
Oh, worked much in
I mean,
favor.
against, it worked in favor of us in terms of getting everything.
Right.
But when we're talking about having lost revenue and this, being able to use this money, we can't use it because we haven't lost
Any tax revenue.
any tax revenue. But we gave some extra money to the tax collector.
No, what we did with the tax collector is the council did agree to allow an extra 90 days. We were required to adopt a policy that either allowed an extra 90 days for a taxpayer to pay their taxes without paying interest, or I can't remember what the other option was. It didn't change anything significantly from the tax collection perspective. And based on the experience in both the July 1, 2020 and the January 1, 2021 collection, there were no significant losses of interest as a result of a taxpayer electing to pay the taxes late. So there was no expense on the side of the city to do that. I know that it talks about revenue entity-wide, which is another piece of this puzzle that we need to look at carefully, which is why we want to meet with the advocacy group. Because when we were meeting with Mr. Aram and Superintendent Lebomsky last week, they were talking about the loss of food service revenue, which was pretty significant. But when we talk about entity-wide losses, we're not sure that even, exactly, qualifies. So a little bit of work for us to do. Also with these Treasury guidance, in addition to those 4 funding objectives, on the second page of that document, which is located on the right side of the screen, and I'm sorry, it's not easy to read. Should have seen me try to copy and paste that thing into this. It talks about equity-focused services. Those equity-focused services directly relate to municipalities where there is a qualified census tract. Qualified census tract is a neighborhood or neighborhoods where your lower socioeconomic demographic resides. In Torrington, we do in fact have 3 qualified census tracts. I think that the superintendent can certainly attest to what schools are impacted by those census tracts, including our middle school and high school, because once they move out of the neighborhood schools, they then become, students of the entire district in the larger schools. So our research on those special considerations under the qualified census tracts leads us to believe that there may be areas of assistance that may be provided to the high poverty school districts. But even those eligible uses must be tied to the pandemic. They either have to be directly related to health initiatives or to, is that the garage door opening? Or to to the families that are, that have been impacted. I'm trying to find some of the language. That providing assistance to high poverty school districts to advance equitable funding across districts, evidence-based educational services and practices to address academic needs of students, including tutoring, summer, after school, and other extended learning and enrichment programs, and evidence-based practices to address social, emotional, and mental health needs of students. So we're still really pigeonholed. We're shoehorned into what we can use the funds for. We think there's room in here for us to advocate for some further clarification, and perhaps even to press upon our congressional delegates to look at reconsidering those uses, especially in a distressed municipality where you have an allianced school district. So my goal would be to work with the Board of Education to identify eligible uses, potentially eligible uses, and then become jointly advocating for changes and clarification on that. Also within the Treasury guidance documents and eligible uses, it is increasingly clear that in addition to trying to address the immediate impacts of the pandemic or mitigating potential future impacts of another pandemic, they really want us to focus on economic development. This would include everything from assistance to businesses, nonprofits, and even families, drilling it down to individual families who have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. We have until December 31, 2024 to obligate the funds. We actually have longer to spend them, but as long as they are obligated by December 31, 2024, we should be in a good position to spend all $10 million that is being appropriated to us. I will tell you that a portion of that $10 million, it only makes sense, would have to include educational spending. I know that the Board of Education is also receiving some of these ARPA funds, but they are also equally hamstrung by the requirements of those funds. So this is an opportunity for us to perhaps get on the books a regular meeting with the Board of Education and continue to check in with each other as to what we're doing to make progress in appropriating and obligating the funds.
Would laptops or internet service fall into this category?
It does. It most definitely does. I mean, really, the way this is written, I could write a check to those families that have been impacted. You know, if they can demonstrate their negative impact, they've lost revenue. I can write checks to landlords who lost rent, fuel assistance, utility assistance. I mean, really, that's the goal. I think that the congressional goal was to get the money to the people. And I think what they missed is the long-term benefit of investing those funds as a municipality or as a Board of Education. You know, where you're going to see an impact with reduction of taxes, with healthier buildings, you know, with stronger infrastructure. So there are a lot of things that we need to clarify, but we don't need to clarify those to adopt a budget right now. I just want to make sure that everybody who's listening to what we're talking about here tonight understands that while what we have to do tonight may not be comfortable, it may not be pleasant, but knowing that the path forward is for us to make sure that we are accessing those funds and utilizing them to the best mutual benefit that we can. I will tell you that one of the other interesting things in the plan was that we could also establish lead abatement programs. We could establish water and sewer infrastructure improvements. So a lot of things for us to consider. But when I look at these funds, I keep thinking about what are we going to do that brings the greatest sustainability of anything that we do. You know, buying a laptop for a family doesn't make sense. Buying laptops for a school that gets them in the hands of the families with some accountability and return policies makes sense. So those are the things that we do plan on working through. So other questions on the ARPA?
Yeah, Mary, you mentioned a number 10 million.
Yes,
That's how much Torrington is allocated?
that is correct. 10 million for the city of Torrington. Board of Education, 5, somewhere around 5 million? 5.9.
So how do we get that? Do they write us a check for 10 million and we spend it?
That'd be the first time.
So we did need to register in the Connecticut portal. Alice took care of that last week. We had to get the council to approve a resolution authorizing us to submit the request. From there, it's just a matter of time. It's my understanding that every single municipality in the state of Connecticut, every non-entitlement unit, there's another layer in there that I didn't talk about. Entitlement communities, 50,000 in population and above, they got their checks already. They went directly to the U.S. Treasury. They registered with their SAMs and their DUNS numbers, and the money was sent to them. For us, because we're under 50,000 in population, we have to register and go through the state for our appropriation. I think the Board of Education, you go through the SDE to get yours.
Will they take any of it?
No,
In
they
terms
cannot.
of an admin fee or
They
any
can-
of that sort of thing?
They cannot, according to the act, they cannot take any administrative fees. However, they are not other than getting these funds over to the municipalities, they're not administering at anything. They send us the funds. The onus is on the municipality to file the appropriate reports with the U.S. Treasury. I think the state and the U.S. Treasury. So whatever we do with these funds, we have to, number one, have clear understanding of how the funds, what funds are eligible, what funding programs are eligible, that we're keeping appropriate records on how we funded the programs, and providing all of the supporting documentation. If anything that we spend this money on is inappropriate, the U.S. Treasury then comes and says, oh, you spent that wrong, give the money back. And I don't think they say give it back in a year. I think they say give it back. So that's the reason when I say Alice and I are going to be meeting with the CCM advocacy group, we can't afford to make those kinds of mistakes. So we want to make sure that we're crossing T's, dotting I's, working together, and more importantly, advocating for more input and more, I'm hoping, Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, Congresswoman Hayes, and Larson will understand how hobbled we are by all of these restrictions and work with us to try to loosen these up a little bit. Other questions on ARPA?
Where did they come up with the 10 million number?
So 3,300,000, 3,000,006 is a direct appropriation to the municipality. The other 6 million actually, because I think what they were trying to do was find one size that fits all for the nation. And in many states, they have county government.
Right.
We do not. So what they were doing is they were saying, municipalities lose out, or the people that live in the municipality lose out if we don't get the appropriation, the countywide appropriation. So what they decided was they would split the county appropriation or allocation per capita. So there's another 6 million coming through the county.
Interesting. Thank you.
More questions? Oh, we'll be talking about ARPA a lot in the next 3 years.
And we discussed last week that if it does any of that money replaces things that we were doing in the budget, in our budget, which were non-personnel because we're not using, hopefully, we can't.
Oh, I'm not using the ARPA money in any of the city's operating budgets, but you will see later on that I am recommending that we set aside a sum of money, the gap in funding of the Board of Education's operating budget, it ends up being $569,281, just to earmark that for the Board of Education for the first fiscal year to see if there's anything else that the Board of Education can spend that money on under the qualified census tract and with those guidance. So other than that, we are not proposing to use any ARPA funds in our operating budget this year.
But if we were to use any capital, towards
Can't.
anything capital, that we would re-look at the capital projects in the city.
We cannot. The only funds we can use for capital projects in the city, and I'm not talking about school buildings, but in infrastructure or capital projects in the city, we can only do so to the extent of our lost revenue,
Which was,
which is right.
Because when you were talking water, sewer construction.
Water and sewer, I'm sorry, water and sewer are separate. Water and sewer, and here again, when Congress was adopting this act, you may recall hearing something about, is it Michigan, I think, that has the lead pipe problem. There's a lot of lead in the water because of the lead pipes. So in that bill that was passed, there was, included in there, funding capabilities for water infrastructure. And that, I think, was, again, one size fits all. There was a problem in Michigan. I'm sure that problem exists in other states as well, but it doesn't exist here. And we don't have city water. The water company is a private company. Even our sewer infrastructure, we 3 years ago undertook a massive upgrade of our system. That's 89% complete. By December of this year, it will be done, and those funds have already been bonded and committed. So it's not like I can go to ARPA and offset any of that. And as far as things like our animal control facility, or we talked about potentially funding the radios, or I think there was a garage in the police department's budget. Those would not qualify. Unless we had loss of revenue, in which case then we could say, here's the sum we have by way of lost revenue, and these are the capital projects we want to fund for that. I'm going to eat my words right away. I'm telling you that there are no ARPA funds being used in this budget. There are strategies that I'm going to present to the Board of Finance regarding to hit the $2.1 million we need to cut out of the city's budget to get us to a zero mill rate. Part of that strategy is moving some of our regular pension costs, which we can utilize ARPA funds for. So I have to take that back. We will be able to use some of these for that. Other questions on ARPA? Right, and I think those pension, actually that qualifies under the essential workers piece of the funding objectives. If there are no other questions on ARPA. Next slide, please. Okay, this is where my day went real fast. So at noon, all things were pretty good. We had a budget. We were ready to advance. Thank you, Mr. Aaron. We had been speaking probably 2 or 3 times over the last 24 hours about, how we could, and to the Board of Education and Superintendent as well, as to how we can move these budgets forward. And then the roof caved in. I received an email from CCM informing us that the $3,098,969, I don't know, talking out of my hat. I don't know what I do with my PowerPoint presentation. Anyways, this $3,098,963, which was in the governor's budget in February and came out of appropriations budget in late April, the last week of April, did not make it to the state budget. So while I had been preparing all of these budgets anticipating $3,098,963 for distressed municipalities, there was even an elaborate calculation. 50% of that was being funded through the CARES Act, 50% of it was being bonded. It was supposed to be a multiple year initiative that was being proposed, just did not make it through the state's budget process. A lot of phone calls, some panicked, some calm, cool, and collected, didn't bring any level of confidence that this money was going to be restored through an implementer bill. It is what it is, that those funds are just simply not available to us to balance our budget. So at 12:05, after I read the email, Alice and I sat back down to say, all right, how do we propose a budget that brings our Board of Education and city in without impacting the mill rate? And I think we go to the next slide. And actually, I'm going to jump around. I'm going to jump off that discussion and pick it up a little bit later on when we go into the budget recommendations. All right, so here we are. Over the last several months, I've had a number of questions that came through various sources asking about the increase in revenue as a result of our grand list growth. And we were all celebrating a 2.2% increase in the grand list. After adjustments for assessment appeals, we had something like 17 the organizations and businesses that appeal their assessment through the Superior Court obviously are very large assessments. So assessment appeals and add deletes. Add deletes are if a new business comes on, we add the business or add the personal property that they bring in. Deletes are when we learn that a business closed, they no longer exist, and when the assessment was done on 10/1, it wasn't picked up. So right up until 11:30 this morning, we were still calculating what those add deletes are, and the net impact is not a 2.22% increase in the grand list, a smaller increase, but the additional revenue as a result of that is $1,988,263. And again, just reflecting back, last year we did $5.6 million worth of one-time funding. $1,988,263 doesn't fill that hole. If we had that $3 million, it did, but this does not. Next slide. Another question that has come to me, I think somebody wants to talk to me about my car warranty, sorry. Another question that kept coming to me through various board members and council members was, they wanted a clearer understanding of the ECS Alliance District funding. In 2018, when the city was identified or the school system was designated an Alliance District, The ECS funding was frozen at the 2012 ECS funding level. That's 2012. It's actually 6 years prior to the designation. That ECS funding is $23,933,343. And that will remain frozen throughout the duration of the designation as an Alliance district. During the same 5-year period of time, however, the grant portion of the ECS, so you see ECS numbers on the state's town runs or on any reports that come from the state, you see a number that's 27 million, 28 million. Well, what happens is the difference between the 23,933, 343 and that number that shows up in the state's budget for the city of Torrington actually gets paid directly to the school as a grant. And the school then submits to the state a plan that is very detailed as to how they're going to address some of the learning gaps or programs and changes and some infrastructure changes with buildings and stuff that would qualify under Alliance District. And those plans, I have one for every member. I think the 2019 plan was the last one, or the only one that the latest one that I was able to access on the SDE website. It's here if anybody wanted to take a look at it, but there's a great deal of accountability as to how the school districts spend that money. This, like I said, is the 2019 fiscal year. At the time, you'll see on the spreadsheet, it was $904,376 that was being sent to the district as a grant. And their plan shows the spending of all $904,376. The question is then what happens after they're no longer an Alliance district? Well, the good news is they're no longer an Alliance district. And I do believe based on the direction the schools have been taking, that's probably sooner than later. Those ECS funds don't disappear. The Alliance district portion of those ECS funds do not disappear. They roll back into the regular ECS funding and then become part of the general fund to be applied to the Board of Education's budget. But so do the expenses that the Board of Education has been appropriating or allocating to those grant funds, which makes sense. You know, the goal here is to improve a district, not get them to improvement and then pull the rug out from under. So the last line on that chart, you'll see how in 2018 it was 549,000, but this year there will be $3,925,897.42, and I understand next year is an even larger bump. So great work that the school is able to accomplish through that. Nobody wants to be an Alliance district, but if you have to be an Alliance district, you know, I can tell you, you want this Board of Ed and superintendent to be in charge of it because what they're doing is working. All right, questions on Alliance district? Nothing. All right, next slide is I'm sorry, I'm losing my. So next slide is where we start talking about the fiscal year 21-22 budget expense requests. As you know, there's a lot of work and angst that goes into developing the budget and then going through the board approvals, Board of Education's process, very public. The city side, our subcommittee, our council, our Board of Safety, all do, you know, the line by line review. So what ended up being approved by the Board of Education for advancement to the Board of Finance, approved by the council and advanced to the Board of Finance are reflected here. The total budget requests was $141,334,508. The change over the 2021 a budget request or budget approved is $7,477,297. You can see immediately that our $5.6 million hole created last year with one-time funding and the $1.9 million of increased tax revenue isn't going to get us to fill that. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the projected revenues. They're fairly flat. We have our general government, and you'll see that I've excluded the distressed municipality funding of the $3,098,000. Is $6,411,205. Our public safety, public works, these are departmental revenues. And then, of course, the education revenues. This $27,977,520 reflects the ECS, excess cost, insurance. What am I missing? Net adult education we took.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the majority of it, yeah.
Yeah. So the 23,933,343 plus premium cost shares are also in there, right? Insurance premium cost share.
Yeah.
So that's where we come up with the educations. And if you remember, I didn't bring the Board of Education's budget here, but they do show those revenues and their revenue page that they submitted to the Board of Finance. Total revenue, and I call this the predictable or regular revenue, is $35,170,525. So everything that, when you look at $141 million budget requests and $35,175,25 of regular revenues, those are, outside of tax revenues, you could see where the gap is. The gap is filled by taxpayers. So next page, please.
I have a question on the public safety.
Please.
I have the detail of that
Yep.
692,000.
Yes.
It does not include any police outside duty revenues.
Yes.
Is the outside duty expenses excluded from the expenditure?
It is,
Okay.
yes. What we did is, those are so subjective. You get, a high level of construction in a year. You have a lot of extra duty hours put in and extra duty revenue. So what we decided to do this year is to pull that out of the operating budget and treat it as an enterprise account. So what you'll see is a reporting on an annual basis, what those expenses actually were, and any surpluses or deficits we will deal with accordingly.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Other questions on revenue? Okay. So the non-recurring. So when you see we have $35 million worth of regular revenues against $141 million budgets that have been presented, we need to fill the gap a little bit to relieve some of the stressors on the taxpayers. So this page shows you, and when I sent this document out last night, I was anticipating an extra $3 million. So hence the strikeout here, just so that everybody understands, why today's budget discussion is very different than yesterday's budget discussion. These one-time revenues, I believe, are still available for us to use to offset the budget requests. Internal Service Fund, we are still seeing good, positive impact on that fund. I don't know if people are still reluctant to go out and have any of those elective surgeries, or if they're seeing their eye doctors and their skin doctors. But what we do know is, based on the experience and the projections, that we feel very comfortable recommending that we again use $2 million from that fund. Keep in mind also that in our budget adoption, we also agreed to fund it at 100%. And was there something else we did for the budget expense side?
For the OPEB,
No, not OPEB, for the regular health insurance. Was it, we just funded it at 100% versus 100 in the past, we've done 110, we cut it to 105, we've gone to 100. So both the Board of Education are funding that at 100%. And so between the reduction in the expense and the availability of this $2 million, we feel we're still fine in that account.
Was there an increase in the insurance rates themselves?
there was if I recall correctly, a minimal increase, right, Ed? Yes,
Yeah.
minimal increase this year. I can't give you the exact percentage. I don't have the paperwork with me, but
But minimal.
yes. It's based on projected claims.
Right.
Right. So last year, pandemic response, we're seeing, fewer expenses being submitted. This year, we're seeing the same. I don't know if people are just going to feel differently about, and we don't want them to delay if there's something that needs to happen. We want our employees to make sure that they're taking care of themselves.
No, because that's going to hit at
Always.
some point.
And also prevention.
Sicker
Mhm.
when that happens than if they had gone earlier to see the doctor.
Which is something we talked about last year as well, and we didn't see that happen so far. So fund balance, you heard Alice speak a little bit earlier. Last year, we looked at
3.1.
3.6 from fund balance. That was the 2.5, the 4, and the Board of Education surplus of 700. We didn't use all of it, so we feel comfortable. And at that point, we didn't bring it down. We kept looking at what is the funding policy. The Board of Finance adopted this policy 6 years ago, and decided that we wanted to budget our fund balance or had a policy that our fund balance would always be in the range of 7 to 10%. I think I asked for 16%, didn't I? So 7 to 10% has always been the target range. So what do we know? We know that we right now have 13% in fund balance. Based on the calculations that I am presenting to you today, I'm looking to bring that fund balance down to 9.5%. That means we had to adjust that 13% for the $2 million for expenses that we haven't transferred for the current fiscal year, and then 3.1 million that I am proposing that we utilize this year to offset the impact of the budget requests.
So after any surpluses, it'll be 9.5.
9.5% is what, after we use.
Adopting this.
Correct.
with surpluses from 20 to 21.
Correct. Yes. And then on this page, you'll also see that we are looking at potential surplus, budget surplus, and this is estimated. And I know the Board of Finance and Ed have been monitoring this closely. Estimated to be $444,000. This, of course, was last week. We all know this stuff can change. It changes from noon to 12:05. But based on what they're projecting at $444,000, we're looking at that as being in play. And the ARPA funds, you heard me talk a little bit earlier, the Board of Education's request for an increase on their operating was $969,281. After discussions with Mr. Aram, I think that we're at a point where a $400,000 increase on their operating will give them the stability, the budget stability that they're looking for to bring on those ESL programs that they need. And the other $569,281 I'm proposing to earmark so that we can continue to work with the Board of Education to see if there are other programs, additional programs that they might be able to identify that aren't, that may be shorter term or wouldn't be significantly impacted by a 3-year funding process. All right, next slide, please. All right, page 10. This is where I just wanted to show when we talk about the budget request of 141 million. We talk about the revenues available to offset that $141 million. That's we need an additional $106,163,983. That's where we start applying the tax revenue. Motor vehicle taxes are capped at 45 mils, so that is a number that we know is established and it's firm. So that's $10,572,638, which leaves a balance, or the taxpayer's burden, or portion, I should say, of the funding requests at $95,591,345. If we do not look at our non-recurring revenues or other strategies, the mill rate impact would be 5.79 mils. Yeah. So that's when I said, all right, let's look at these non-recurring revenues. Internal Service Fund, as you heard me talk about earlier, $2 million. Fund balance, $3.1 million. The Distressed Municipalities Funds no longer available. It still leaves a balance of $19,491,345, which is still a 3.8 mil increase. Next slide. This is where the rubber hits the road. To get us to a no mill rate impact, I would have to recommend, I am recommending, and this again, expressing my gratitude to the Board of Education for taking my panicked phone call this morning, for working with us. I'm proposing that we reduce the amount of the increase that was requested by $569,281, leaving or resulting in an increase of $400,000 over the 2021 fiscal year. And again, to the extent available, utilize the ARPA funds to cover any additional programs or items in their budget that we can to allow the board to keep moving forward as it has over these last 5 years. Second, I am suggesting or recommending that we reduce the Board of Education capital request, which was $2,995,898. A good portion of that is the middle school roof, which was $1,500,000.
That's the second half of the roof.
That is the second half of the roof, yes. In 2018, you will recall, we asked the Board of Education to bring forward a request or what they needed to fix roof and windows at the middle school, because those were budget items that kept falling prey to budget cuts. At that time, the estimates for the roof was $750,000, the windows $700,000. So we bonded $1.4 million for those two projects. That half of the roof was done. At the time, it was Dave Becerra, who was the facilities director, indicated that he was only proposing half the roof because the other half appeared to still be viable and didn't require to be changed or updated. Here we are, 4 years, almost 5 years later, and that roof, the other half of the roof does need to be done. So I would not feel, it would not be responsible of me to suggest that we eliminate that roof project from consideration. Also, in the 5-year capital plan, the Board of Education has identified that the Vogel-Wetmore roof is also in need of repairs. I believe that has been budgeted for the 22-23 fiscal year. And that at the time in the budget, I believe is 1.345. So my recommendation to the Board of Finance would be that we either put this out to referendum vote and bond it, put the 2 roof projects out and bond them. The superintendent shared with me that the window project actually would qualify under the Board of Education's ESSER money or ARPA money. ARPA. So we would not need to bond the windows after all. We didn't do that yet. That's $700,000. So if we do proceed to do a referendum for this roof work, we would certainly put out there that we're not following or going to proceed with the $700,000 of window work. So 2 roofs I would recommend. And of course, this is a different discussion for a different day. The other alternative is to, as I said earlier, dig into these ARPA funds. Vogel-Wetmore School is in that census tract that has been identified for special consideration. That roof may very well qualify because of its situs within that district. Needs to be done, but I don't want to delay that work. I do think it's important for us to move forward. Obviously, roof work traditionally happens in the summertime when the kids are not in school. So whatever we do, we want to make sure that we're in a position so that the Board of Education can proceed with re-roofing in the summer of 2022. That would be the next fiscal year. But this isn't a conversation to have next budget season. It's a conversation to have right now.
The timing on this is going to be relatively important with the recent explosion in material costs.
Yes.
We're seeing an 8 to 10-fold increase in building material. So this budget might not even be close to reasonable currently.
I agree. And all of the financial analysts that I've been speaking with say, those building costs will level off. Not to say that they're going to return to pre-pandemic costs, but timing is everything. I will tell you that the animal control facility is a perfect example. When we went out to bid for that project 2 years ago, it came in at 1.9 million. We went out to bid 2 months ago, it came in at 2.8 million. So
That was bonded, wasn't it?
that also $1 million. When we went out to referendum, we were anticipating $1 million. So referendum being an option, the animal control facility would be one of the things I would add to that referendum. So it would be the 2 roofs and the animal control facility, or some strategic way for us to budget for this thing. But those are discussions we have to have after tonight, but sooner than later. So that results in a level funding. No, it doesn't. It results in less than level funding in the capital because last year, I think the capital for the Board of Education was $304,695. The third recommendation would be to allow the Board of Education to move their surplus, the fiscal year 2021 surplus, and again, it's just an estimate, into capital reserve to cover additional capital expenses and an annual allocation or sinking that they have been doing to address maintenance on the turf fields. And it doesn't require a motion to approve that this evening, but once the Board of Education is in a position where they're ready to present the request to the Board of Finance, I think they need some very strong assurance that the request would not be denied. Obviously, all of this is still a work in progress. We need to work together identifying additional qualified expenses, looking at that 5-year capital plan. If it's computers, if it's broadband, if it's hotspots, if it's infrastructure, HVA systems, we want to make sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned in our school buildings, because if they qualify, or they're eligible, I should say, under the qualified census tract, we want to make sure we're capturing that opportunity.
One of the things we've talked about in the past is security systems. Would those be covered under the ARPA, or could they?
I think in the school buildings located within those census tracts, but again, those are things that we need to clarify. And I know security systems was part of the 5-year plan.
And how did you explain that it is, the census tract affects the middle school and the high school as those are?
Well, that's an argument that I'm willing to present. So the census tracts for Litchfield County, as identified in the US IRS section 42, subsection D, 5B, there are 4 qualified census tracts in Litchfield County. 3 of them are Torrington. And it is essentially our south end and part of the west end.
So would you identify the number of students that come from those districts?
No, I think-
The middle school and high school, and then it's a percentage, or?
Yeah,
Or-
whatever we can do to qualify expenses. My argument would be that the families from those census tracts are in the middle school. Middle school it's up on the east end of Torrington. High school, I'm not sure, I don't believe that's in one of these census tracts. But what happens is all of the families from those census tracts go to the middle school. So the middle school would be, I think, and we can pull all of the data that the Board of Education collects on a regular basis. It's free and reduced lunch. You know, it's all of that. So we could, I think, pose a pretty strong argument. But obviously we want to make sure that whatever our argument is, it will hold water so that we're not being asked to return anything that we spend without justification.
Mayor, I like
Yes.
to get input from the Board of Ed and Mr. Aram regarding cutting your capital budget to 0. What effect is that going to have on projects that need to be done? Are they going to be deferred till?
Well, some of the projects, as the mayor said, are going into our surplus. One is the middle school vestibule. The other one was the curbing at Torrington School. The other one was the flooring at Southwest. The other one was the technical, was trying to go into one of your grants at 1.9 million. The other one was the roof. Those are the major items in the capital.
What's going to happen to those? It's my question, I
Well,
guess.
444,000.
We'll cover part of it, yeah, okay.
And 100,000 for so 544,000 goes into the surplus, which we'll write a letter to the Board of Finance after tomorrow's night's meeting. The 1.9 million, the mayor's going to take out a grant, and the 1.5 would go into the
Referendum or ARPA if we can.
that covers probably 95%.
Okay. So you'll survive.
We always try to survive. Isn't that a song?
I'll look for that spin tomorrow.
I think if we work together, like we did in the last couple of days, moving the parts where the grant is and so forth, we're going to take care of the windows. will save you 700,000 with the roof. The first check, I said to the man, I gave you a check. I didn't give you a check. 381,000, cover that, you're gonna get an extra 15% from the state on that. So, so we're working together on those.
Absolutely.
Okay. I was just concerned of what the effect would be on.
And I think for a lot of people, the security systems are a high priority. So certainly with these ARPA funds, I would want to look at those carefully. But ARPA falls outside of the regular operating budget. We can work on these things, and if we decide next month that these qualify and the ARPA funds are available, we can start moving on them. We obviously want to do it very transparently. We want to have an open process. We would make a presentation to the council, to the Board of Finance. Obviously, there'd be some public participation in guiding that, but.
And none of this would be retroactive. We couldn't take funds for, say, the fire alarm system.
No.
That's long gone.
It is.
Figured.
Mayor, are we planning on putting a board or subcommittee together to determine those ARPA? And I know that was a conversation at one point. Are we putting together almost a task force to identify where we're going to spend those ARPA funds?
I think when it comes to the economic development, yes.
Okay.
When it comes to the Board of Education's eligible projects and Public Works eligible projects, we have to rely on our experts in their fields. Let them identify what those are and then bring them to the board as a whole. But definitely the economic development, I think that would be prudent. And whether we use the current committee structure that we have with Economic Development Commission, Arts and Culture Commission, or we establish a task force. I remember when I first heard the $10 million was being proposed before the act was enacted. I did reach out to both Fiona and Superintendent Lebowski to say $10 million is a lot of money, and at the time I wasn't thinking that these funds would be, that there would be eligible school projects paid for out of these funds. But I do know that whatever we do as a community impacts the Board of Education, and whatever the Board of Education does impacts the community. So my initial outreach, it may have been late February or early March, was to say, this is something we really want to work together on. And that has not changed. My first panic phone call this morning was to Mr. Aram. But public participation and process is prudent under the circumstances.
I guess I'm just looking for a way for this board and the council should as well, basically, if we're going to go forward with this plan, that we plan to stick to what we said here, that we are going to afford the Board of Ed every opportunity under the city's side of that ARPA funding. So, that's only reason why I asked. It kind of seems like a way to ensure that.
Which was, I said a little earlier, I think this is where, a quarterly meeting with the Board of Finance and the Board of Education and City Council might actually be the best way to approach this. We could certainly do a subcommittee, but I don't know if anybody else is committee weary. Board of Education has so many subcommittees and a building committee and.
Want to take on any more committees?
But it's something we can talk about. And if that's after meeting with Fiona and Sue, if that's something that we think might work better, we can certainly bring it back with a proposal.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, given the resources and energy that the city and the community and the taxpayers have put into the middle school, getting the air quality in the middle school where we needed it to be, that to not take care of the roof in whatever capacity we need to do that, because that will impact the air quality.
Absolutely. And with the plan, once the new middle school, high school is complete, to move 7th and 8th grade into the new building and move elementary aged kids into the middle school. We want to make sure that middle school is ready. And it should be a flagship school just as much as the new middle school, high school is. So I agree, and that's the reason I'm saying, while I may be recommending that we eliminate the capital proposals, I am not proposing that we not talk about a funding alternative. Funding alternative is referendum, both roofs, animal control facility, or ARPA funding for the roofs that can be done through ARPA. But at any rate, I do believe a referendum is going to be needed because we can't delay this animal control facility any longer either.
Are there any other major capital things coming up that should also be included in that referendum? I mean, I like the idea of moving towards more of a sinking fund model, so we're prepared for some of these big expenses, but if we're already going out for 3, does it make sense to go out for 6 if there's a city building or a third school that should be looked at? Might not be an answer today, but just something to keep in the back of our mind as we move there.
Yes.
You know,
I
I
would
hate
say yes.
surprises.
Oh, you and me both. Well, and that's the beauty of these 5-year capital plans is, the blueprint is there.
Right.
So on the city side, we can just pull that 5-year plan and have Mr. Drew identify what are those looming large cost items that once they're done, you can start in your operating budget actually sinking those funds just the way the Board of Education has the approach they've taken with their turf field, just as the city has done with vehicle replacement and the police department and fire department for years, earmark and budget a portion for their larger capital projects, their PPE, air.
And we can look at economies of
SCBA.
scale as well.
Yes.
So if we're going out to bid for roofs, let's look at if they can do all the roofs.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if we can combine forces and save some money that way, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So my thought is, when we talk about referendum, what do we know? Immediately the windows, which was a $700,000 item. And the animal control facility was $1 million project. So that's $1.7 million of bonding that we're not going to do. So we look at what's the difference and how do we make sure that we put that out there for the voting public. All right. And then the last item on this agenda, on this page is a recommendation that we reduce the city budget by $2,120,421.
And that's at the discretion of the city council.
Yes, that would be, I do have here a few recommendations. This was we have 1 hour to find $3 million, where do we look first kind of approach to this. But I'll run through those. They're nothing more than a spitball list, but I will share those thoughts with you. So what would the budget look like if these recommendations are adopted here this evening? We would be looking at a city budget of $58,716,010. We'd be looking at a BOE operating budget of $76,932,898. We would be looking at that would be a total of $135,648,908. And then the revenues that we reviewed earlier, the $35,175,25. Tax revenues for the motor vehicle and the personal property taxes, you see them there. And those one-time fund balance, internal service funds, applications would balance this spending plan.
So what's going to be lost on the city side? Because,
Okay.
and I know we
I'll go
don't,
through that. So could you go forward 2 slides, please? What we would be looking at to accomplish our $2 million cut, we would be looking at, there was the assessor's office, when we talk about sinking funds, the assessor office, for revaluation, annually sinks funds. They were looking to increase that funding level over last year. So I would be eliminating that increase, 13,400. The city real estate capital plan was requesting a 1,003,000 and change increase. A good percentage of that was the animal control facility. It was a feasibility study for a public safety complex and a few other items. I am proposing that we level fund that and eliminate that $1 million. Grant reimbursement on the PD dash cams. This is a item that is required under the accountability bill, but we know that 50% of those expenses that are itemized in the police department budgets would be covered by a grant. So we're proposing to move the grant portion out of the spending plan. I would propose that the addition of a part-time city hall custodian be moved into ARPA funds. This would qualify under the pandemic response. During the pandemic, we actually hired somebody through Jackie Carroll. He was actually quite wonderful, and at least 3 times a day I could hear him washing the door handle in my office. So that I think is something that would be appropriate under the ARPA funding objectives. I would be proposing, and I am loath to do this, but knowing that it would be a 1-year proposal to fund 50% of the normal pension costs. These, I said a little earlier, would also qualify under ARPA because they do talk about essential workers and stipends. And while we're not able to make a lump sum deposit into any pension, those normal costs, which would be part of payroll, would qualify. I would only recommend this to the council with a planned restoration, that we would restore this 50% next year and 100% the year after. So we would be back at the appropriate funding levels. Included in this 50% and these numbers, the 230,000 and the 602,000, is you may recall that we did change the funding.
They are.
Yeah. To reflect more closely what the portfolio investment return rate was.
Right.
So we reduced that return rate, which resulted in a higher ARC.
Yep.
And so in this, $800,000 is almost $300,000 of which was an increase as a result of the ARC. If we hadn't done that, I'd only be looking at $500,000 here. So I don't want to say no harm, no foul. Pensions for me are a sacred cow. But we have done this. We did this 8 years ago. And we had a 4-year restoration promise, and we stuck to it. And so I do feel confident we could do it again. I would, and these are where Alice was digging her heels in, adjust the defined contribution estimate. FICA adjustments in various departments. There's in contingency, a management operations contingency. These were funds that I had been budgeting for the last couple of years, trying to do some analyses, studies, jobs, things like the PD feasibility study, I should say public safety complex study. That was the purpose of these funds. We haven't been able to do those, so I think if we didn't budget them this year, it wouldn't set us back. Citywide management operations, it's the same thing in the financial office. We were looking at, how do we do these job studies and how are we making sure that by industry standards, do we have the right number of employees in place? And even a complete review of all of our benefits, various benefits packages, which I think there are 15 different packages. I would propose that we eliminate that. And then that would leave a balance of $50,000, which I probably would look at that and say, let's do a proportional share to each department, excluding the Board of Education. So it would be a minimal impact to each department, although I am still looking at our recreation budget, which was proposing to restore a number of part-time employees for the camps and the swimming pool. And unfortunately, we are hitting a brick wall in finding people to take those jobs. So there may be in that $50,000, there may be a considerable portion of it that I can cover through recreation programs. That just can't happen. So that's what we would do for the $2 million.
So there's no impact from this to the operating
No,
side of the city. This is mostly capital or internal.
correct.
Okay.
So that's where we are. Questions?
I made the same face 8 years ago about the pensions.
Oh, yeah. I was the one that voted against it. Yeah.
What city departments still receive pensions? Because I know the police department no longer. I know there's still outstanding pensions, but for new employees.
Just new employees. There's still a high percentage of existing employees that are pensioned employees.
Right. But is the police department the only one for new employees that?
No.
What other?
City Hall, new employees are not pensioned. It's a defined contribution plan. Police department, fire department. All of our departments are new employees on defined contribution, but there are still a good percentage of our employees that are pensioned employees.
That are still working.
Correct.
The city.
Yes. Other questions? So you can see 4 hours of our afternoon was pretty exciting. So if there are no questions or no further questions on discussion of the budgets, then I would like to move into the next agenda items. This would be a roll call vote. So I would need a motion.
So moved.
Wait a minute, let me put it out
I
there.
shouldn't say it yet.
I would need a motion to adopt the 21-22 Board of Education operational budget in the sum of $76,932,898.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Bayes, seconded by Ms. Pesky. Questions or comments?
This is really hard because we had such a good joint meeting.
Yes.
I was very impressed with the items that were coming forward, and whatever we can do to make sure that those new programs continue to happen. They were important programs. And so all these other machinations to move all these things so that the ESL for sure can happen, and all the support for the children who have been so negatively affected by the pandemic. Just let's make sure we take care of them.
Other questions or comments?
I concur. We had a great meeting, and I think that, it was our intention originally to fully fund this the way that we discussed in prior budget talks. And obviously the state again pulled the rug from underneath us, but it's nothing new. So, I think it's just important that the Board of Education knows that over these next few years, we're going to continue to work and identify ways to continue that support and continue to support them in any way we can. So thank you.
And the only thing I just want to, I heard the comment about the state. I think this is one of those situations where, you know, you had a governor's budget, the appropriations committee, and then the legislature. You know, I can't say they pulled the rug out from under us. What I can say is the budget process doesn't align itself with municipal budget processes.
Right.
If they had voted on this at the end of April, we were sitting here today with the wailing and gnashing of teeth over $3 million.
Right.
We would have had more time to think about this more deliberately and planfully. So I think less about the end result and more about the process is what I complain about.
I think just so as far as I just can't wrap my head around when they're deliberating budgets, how they don't feel that funding to distressed municipalities who need it, that money is going to go towards educating kids and cleaning streets and repairing bridges. I can't understand why they don't feel that's important enough to include in a vital budget. And it is what it is, but that's why, you know, feel that way. So.
Other questions or comments before I do the roll call?
Yeah, I would just, I guess, add, as horrible as this is, imagine if we had this conversation a month ago. You know, right now the glass is kind of half empty. If we did this, you know, had this conversation a month ago, I'm not really sure what the recourse would be.
Which is exactly what Alice and I were saying at 12:10. At 12:05, I got that email from CCM. At 12:10, I was like, it would be irresponsible of us to stay the course and recommend that we adopt a budget with $3 million of revenue that we know just isn't there. It's phantom. It's a phantom revenue. I will tell you on that CCM call this morning, there were a number of municipal leaders that were quite distraught because they had already counted on that and they had already adopted their budgets and set their mill rate. So when we talk about our funding, our fund balance policy, those are the kinds of things. That's the reason when we go through bonding and official statement and all of the that review, those are the kinds of things that they say is what would you do without a 10% fund balance if you didn't have that revenue coming in. So that's the reason for having a healthy fund balance, that if we had done this a month ago and then learned that there was $3 million that didn't exist, we would have no choice but to go to fund balance. So those are always, which is why I so appreciate this board was asking what is the impact of fund balance? We're still on the high end of our policy on this.
I think that's probably one of the only reasons why most of us feel comfortable with this proposal at this point, because if that was at 7% or below, I wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward with this. So
I would not recommend it if it was.
But 9.5 in a year like this, when we're still trying to dig ourselves out and move forward, something that I'm comfortable with. So.
All right, so I have a motion on the table. If there is no further discussion, I'll do the roll call. To my right, Mr. Boynton.
Aye.
Ms. Pesky.
Aye.
Mr. Bushka.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye.
Mr. Bayes.
Aye.
And Mr. Wright.
Yeah, aye.
Thank you. All right, item 7. Actually, roll call vote to adopt the 2021-22 Board of Education capital plan at 0. I guess is the best way to do that.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Wright. Questions or comments on the motion? It is still roll call. Mr. Boynton.
Aye.
Ms. Pesky.
Aye.
Mr. Bushka.
Aye.
I know, I heard that reluctance. Mr. Anderson.
It's not easy.
No.
Aye.
Mr. Bayes.
Aye.
And Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 8, roll call vote to adopt the 2021-2022 city budget at $58,716,010.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bayes, seconded by Mr. Anderson. Questions or comments? Hearing none. Roll call. Mr. Boynton.
Aye.
Ms. Pesky?
Aye.
Mr.
Aye.
Bushka? Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Bayes?
Aye.
Mr. Wright?
Aye.
All right. 9, roll call vote to set the mill rate, and this is the mill rate for personal property and real estate at 46.17.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Bushka, seconded by Mr. Bayes. Questions on the motion?
Just to clarify, that's a no mill rate increase over
That,
next year.
yes, that is correct. 46.17 is level.
Could you remind me,
And the year before.
And the year before, and the year before.
It's the third year.
just something I was thinking of on the way over. Do we also authorize you to sign the warrant at the same time as the tax collector, or was that a separate thing?
You know, we can add that. I know that this comes up every year. It used to be that all the Board of Finance members
Would sign
sign it.
I thought last year.
But then
we
we've
did
been
not.
authorizing you to
Okay.
sign it for us.
All right, so amended motion then, roll call. Will you amend your motion to set the mill rate for real estate and personal property at 46.17 and authorize the mayor to execute the tax warrant?
So amended.
Thank you. Mr. Bayes?
So amended.
All right, the other questions or comments? Hearing none, still roll call. Mr. Boynton?
Aye.
Ms. Pesky?
Aye.
Mr. Bushka?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Bayes?
Aye.
Mr. Wright?
Aye.
Item 10, roll call vote. I'll entertain a motion to set the motor vehicle mill rate at 45, which is a statutory requirement, and authorize the mayor to execute tax warrant.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Bayes. Questions?
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Well, I do have a question.
Yes.
Will they ever, well, I guess it would require the state to allow us to charge the same mill rate as on real estate and personal property. So they'd need as part of their budget.
Yes. Yeah, certainly won't happen this year.
No, I understand that.
I think there's still a move afoot to eliminate motor vehicle taxes entirely. You know, and then there were some crazy bills about taxation in this last session, you know, that houses over $300,000 would have a different tax rate. That we would be able to charge tax on 100% of the value of houses. A lot of crazy taxation legislation that either didn't make it out of committee or certainly failed on the floor. But
That would have a lot of moving.
yes, a lot of municipalities. I thought the question you were going to ask is there any chance that they will actually increase that stabilization grant? You know, because the amount of revenue that we lose between the 46.17 and the 45 is higher than the amount that they reimburse us.
We've been there before.
Yeah. So they don't make us entirely whole as a result of that legislation.
Rather just get our mill under 45.
Really? Yes, that would be a goal. All right, so the motion was made by Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Bayes. It is roll call. Mr. Boynton?
Aye.
Ms. Pesky?
Aye.
Mr. Bushka?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Bayes?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson? Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Sorry.
Can I go tight?
All right, motion passes. Item 11. That's it for budget. And thank you again to the Board of Education and Mr. Aram and the superintendent. We have a lot of work ahead of ourselves. I'm cautiously optimistic that these ARPA funds will come in handy. So we'll start tomorrow, start peeling away the capital plan and see what we can do to identify those. All right. Absolutely. All right, so item number 11 on the agenda is a discussion and potential action regarding the Franklin Street remediation costs. This was an item because what we are asking the board for permission to do is to access contingency funds, the city's current contingency funds, to complete the remediation of the property. I gave, at your seat, you should find a letter that was written by Rista, our Economic Development Director, who unfortunately was sick at the meeting last night and is sick, so I'm filling in. So what do we have? We have, the good news is, the great news is, it's clean. This is a piece of property that the city owns. We took it by way of a donation back in 2018. What we learned is it was contaminated. Early indications on the contamination, thought that it wasn't too bad. But as soon as you put a shovel in the ground, those contamination or remediation costs go up. Total cost for the remediation, the LEP oversight and legal fees is estimated to be $2,016,567.37. It's oddly specific for an estimate. The reason we say estimate is because we have a cushion of $20,000 in there for final legal fees. We haven't been invoiced since the end of April. So we're waiting for that final invoice, and we're guesstimating that to be a round number. So the funding sources that were utilized to cover that $2,016,567.37 was the DECD Brownfield Remediation Grant of $1,344,188.72. Our EPA Revolving Loan Fund, which is a self-sustaining loan fund that continues to be repaid, is the $454,521. We did utilize Building Healthier Communities, $100,000 from the $750,000 grant. So we utilized $100,000 from that grant, and a mini grant from the Naugatuck Valley COG Brownfield Revolving Loan Fund. Back in 2019, we recognized an opportunity to work with outside of our own COG, which is the Northwest Hills COG, through the Naugatuck Valley COG, because they had a brownfield land bank and they had considerable brownfield funds available. So we joined their COG, and through that membership, we're able to access $44,328. The total funding, she's going to learn how to use a comma instead of those decimal points. The total revenues or income available to offset the $2,016,000 is $1,943,037.72, leaving a balance of about $60,000, $58,000. We're looking, and the city council approved or authorized us to access contingency funds up to and not to exceed $75,000 to complete the remediation. And it's not remediation, the remediation is done, but to pay the invoices that are coming in right now, pay the legal fees, and move to a closing with Penrose. We are at this point trying to schedule a groundbreaking to happen the second week of July, because they are ready to move and build this building. So the motion that I would be looking for from the Board of Finance is a motion to authorize my office to access funds up to and not to exceed $75,000 to complete the remediation, legal fees, and LEP oversight of the project.
So Mayor, question, that's,
You gotta move it.
So moved. Thank you, Ms. Pesky.
yeah.
And then we do the.
And so I heard Ms. Pesky and I heard Mr. Bushka. All right, so the floor is open for discussion.
So that's 2020, 2021 contingency.
That's correct.
Funds. And what's the balance in there? Do we know?
$129,311.
You knew that we were going to ask that question, it sounds like.
It's a question I would ask. I always think, what question would I ask? Yes.
Is that Building Healthier Communities grant, is that through the Northwest Community Foundation?
It actually, that Building Healthier Communities was a fund set up by Hartford Healthcare.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember that.
Yes.
That's why I was, so it doesn't go through Northwest.
Well, the Northwest Community Foundation is the fiduciary managing the funds.
Yeah.
We,
Fireland?
that's what I thought it was. 6 or 8 weeks ago, we presented an update on what was going on with the property to Building Healthy Communities Committee, recognizing that, a portion of the Naugatuck River Greenway is going through that, recognizing that modern, healthy housing is a priority that aligns with the mission of Building Healthier Communities. We didn't ask them for additional funds. We asked them for permission to access 100,000 of the 750 they had already allocated, and they all agreed.
Is this offset already included in the budget presentation we just saw?
So because that is 2021 fiscal year contingency funds, it would not impact the 22 budget.
Yeah, I was just curious if the surplus that you calculated going into the general.
So no, I hear your question. Does that mean the 1.6 million surplus that we think we won't be utilizing?
Right.
No, it shouldn't, because we will still be turning over $54,000 out of contingency.
Okay.
Is there anything that can be done in the future so that town isn't on the hook for all of these funds? Any way to write the contract differently, or is there any way that we're not going to get on the hook again next time we find ourselves in this situation?
This is such a great question. This is a piece of property that, the legacy was industrial. We had every expectation that there was going to be a significant need to clean up. Back in 2019, after we had done the first round of cleanup, which resulted in that parking lot being serving as a cap, we went back to DECD and said, we think it's going to cost another $2 million to clean this property. And we applied for additional funding, grant funding. They gave us $1 million. And when they gave us the $1 million, they said, but you may come back for an additional up to 50% more. So $1.5 million was available to us. I think that if we had gotten the full appropriation that we'd asked for, we wouldn't be sitting here with this. But to answer your question, always you want to look at who is the responsible party for the contamination. A Nidec site is a perfect example. It's contiguous to this. At one point, it was all owned by the same industrial magnates. Do we go back after them and say, you are the responsible party and we need you to reimburse us? In this case, they would essentially be reimbursing the state of Connecticut, and our Brownfield Revolving Loan Fund. But I do feel strongly that we need to at least identify who the responsible parties are and then make a determination of, what is the benefit of going after recovering these funds. Certainly is making me think more than twice about whether or not we would ever consider taking the Nidec site, which was something that was always, sort of on our radar. This is a little 2-acre piece of property, and the Nidec site is another 7 acres. Our experience wasn't great. This wasn't fun.
You have to look at the SARA laws and see if we can find, it's cradle to post disposal. So you'd have to be able to find a responsible party tied into that. Even a transportation company would be liable under the CERCLA laws and the SARA laws. So, but you're paying the lawyers a lot of money.
Yes, we are.
With that being said, I am super excited that going all the way back to the Working Cities Challenge and a lot of the things we've identified here in Torrington on how we're going to be able to move forward. This piece of property is pivotal in so many conversations. So I'm really excited to hear that we're moving forward on this, and yeah, it's $75,000, but I'm looking at the opportunity, and I think it'll pay itself back well more than that.
Tax revenue.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And
Post-abatement tax revenue.
Yes.
And I will say that with this investment, between the investment at Franklin Plaza, this investment of housing, I have in my voicemail a request for a meeting with a developer is reaching out to the city because he's interested in investing in a significant piece of property for commercial uses. So I do like to believe that these investments are already showing a return aside from tax revenue. So if there are no further questions, I will call the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 12, I'll entertain a motion to accept the Board of Education's financial reports.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bayes.
Second.
And second by Mr. Anderson. Questions or comments on them? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 13, I'll entertain a motion to entertain discussion by department heads.
Chief,
Wait,
Alice.
let me get a motion on the floor.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bushka, and seconded by Mr. Bayes.
Yep, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, last man standing. Chief Dowie, anything this evening?
Aye, Chief. Thanks.
All right. Jonathan, anything from City Clerk?
Well, it is June, dog licensing month, so, dog licenses are coming in. This year, we have a little promotion going with Bad Dog Brewery.
Oh, nice.
Where it's a coupon for a free drink for anyone who licenses the dog, so, people are really getting a kick out of that. I think our staff loves it even more than the dog owners, but it's going well, and happy to one. So.
I'm thinking that our online permitting software, which was budgeted in the next year, and we are currently going through the machinations of implementing, will eliminate some of that because then people will be able to do their permitting online.
Yeah,
Dog
well,
licensing.
actually, this was one positive thing that came out of COVID was with COVID restricting people's ability to come in person.
Yeah.
Last year, our software that we put this information into made it possible to do the renewals online. And
Excellent.
This year was just a continuation of that, which they were kind of forced to do last year. So it's that's really worked out for us.
Great news. Good job. Alice.
I thought you were going to forget about me.
I know.
I'm sure she only remembers me when there's $3
Chris
million.
Anderson. Can you come upstairs, please? Do you need me at the meeting? Yes, I need you at the meeting.
I have nothing. Thank you, Mayor.
No, but thank you. I have to say it again. I just can't express enough gratitude that I have for Alice, because boy, when you're in a crunch situation, you want that one person that you know can see the way clear. And I think she put in 24 hours in a 3-hour period of time.
Is this going to be your last budget?
No.
No? I'll take that. Well, if it happens to be, thank you. Thank you.
All right, then we'll move into item number 14. I'll entertain a motion to consider business by the mayor and members of the Board of Finance.
So move.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Boynton, and all in favor.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're open. Anything, Mr. Boynton?
Well, I don't know if I really want to open this Band-Aid, but we're talking budget, we're talking grand list. Any update on the hotel?
So, yes. The matter is in court. The plaintiff in the action, Jason Hospitalities, hired an attorney. The attorney represented New London in the Kilo versus New London case. So they're pretty expert at eminent domain law. They did call into question some of the jurisdictional issues. This piece of legislation was adopted or enacted, I should say, for municipalities with a population of 35 and above. According to the Department of Public Health, our population is 34,044 people. So there was a jurisdictional question about whether or not we really qualified under the legislation. And then they also questioned the constitutionality of the statute. So do I really want to be that municipality that tests the constitutionality of a statute? So I heard yes. It might be cheaper to buy this thing at what their asking price. But it is still in the courts. While those issues have been raised by the defendant, the good news is we are still in court. We did agree to enter into mediation with the judge overseeing mediation. Part of that mediation included us providing a list of those things that we wanted the defendant to do immediately with the property, a short-term plan to remediate blight, fire code violations, building code violations, and ongoing maintenance and appearance issues. And then a long-term strategy for redeveloping or putting the property on the market. They were supposed to respond. The mediation gave them 30 days. They were supposed to respond May 15th. They asked for an extension to June 1st. They weren't able to make that extension, so they asked for another extension to June 15th. Oh, yes, that's today. And they haven't met the date. This is, and when we presented all of this to the judge in our complaint, this is exactly what we identified, that they just are incapable of moving this project, right? You know, and it's always, I need 2 more weeks, I need another month, so I'm kind of pleased that there's a clear pattern that the judge now also sees. So tomorrow morning, the 15th is the 15th until midnight. So tomorrow morning, we will be reaching out to the court
It's
again.
not the 15th end of business, because in that case,
Is there
it's
a
the
new,
16th.
is there a new motion?
So I am pressing forward on that. I will also tell you that I have reached out to a few other potential developers. I will also share with you that when we talk about the ARPA funds and we talk about those economic development strategies, ATIF, a tax incentive financing program, certainly makes sense where a potential developer could fill, the gap by acquiring a piece of property like that and immediately having some working capital to get it up and running. So everything is on the table when it comes to this piece of property. I am not taking my eyes off that. I can't. It's right across the
Yeah,
street.
literally, you can't. Yeah.
Right. So, but it is definitely on our, more than just our radar. It's stamped on my forehead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pesky?
So hard to get to this point every single year. We've started the budget. You guys start the putting together your budget so long ago. And then we're making these decisions tonight. It's not good. It's not good business. It's not a way for the legislature to put us in this position. It's not good for us to get to this position. I know we took advantage of putting off setting the mill
We
rate.
did, yes.
And that made sense. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done that, but it's just not good business. It's not good decision-making to be taking the matters of this importance and this much money and we're moving the cups to figure out, to try and decide where to put the money and how to get it, rob Peter to pay Paul. It's frustrating. On the upside, we came downtown on Saturday night and we couldn't find a parking place.
Hooray.
And there was
They're all under repair.
No, there was a recital back at the Warner,
Yes.
and the restaurants were open, and it was nice weather, and it was kind of fun to
I'm glad
be
glad
down.
to hear that.
I just, you have to drive past that silly Warner, the
Yankee Peddler.
the peddler. You have to see the empty storefronts, but you can see the ones that are there and the ones that are coming. And so that's exciting.
I agree. Mr. Bushka?
Yes, I'd just like to compliment the mayor and Alice and whoever else, Mr. Aram, really, in my mind, pulling together a budget in 3 hours, which was amazing. One concern I have, and I don't think you're going to do this, but spending ARPA money on operations.
Right.
I mean, there are some, it looks to me like there were some salaries and things you could pay out of that, but I'd be reluctant to do that, for obvious reasons, because then when that money dries up, then our taxpayers are responsible for it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's about it for tonight.
No, sage advice. Mr. Anderson?
Nothing left to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baez?
Just to what Mr. Bushka and the rest of the board members said, a debt of gratitude to you, Mayor. I know the past 5 weekends and beyond haven't been fun for you. I'm sure you'd like to also be out enjoying the weather, but I know you were inside working on budgets, and to Alice, thank you. You know, this board does a lot of work on the budgets, but I don't think from an outside perspective, anybody really understands how many hours go into getting to this one document tonight. It's a tremendous undertaking, and you know, it just can't be taken for granted. So thank you, and thank you to my fellow board members for sticking it out, and Lorraine for sticking it out on budget subcommittee with me. I know we had about 7 meetings a month, it felt like this year, but we stuck it out and we got it done. So thank you.
Well said. Mr. Wright?
I also was downtown Saturday, and I'd like to point out that we have a beautiful mural that is now gone up.
is it?
It's outstanding.
Yeah, he did a great job.
And I also like to echo Mark and Chris in thanking Alice and the mayor for an outstanding job. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time to R&R time for the mayor. And
This board can vote to mandate a 1-week vacation after this. We can
Starting on the 26th.
We can do
You
that.
can count on it.
Yeah, if we can do that.
All right. All right. Well, there's no further business before the boards. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Mr. Anderson. Seconded by Mr. Bushka. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
thank you.
Yeah, what's the name of that suit, the hotel that falls under that?
The plaintiff, the defendant in the action?